In the days since the murders in Buffalo targeting black people, we've learned the suspected gunman had been planning his rampage for months, posting online that he chose his targeted area specifically because it had the highest percentage of black people relatively close to his home, more than 200 miles away. An attack clearly motivated by hate, the same hate we've seen time and again right here in Massachusetts, which we recently learned was ranked as having the fourth highest level of hate propaganda activity in the country in an Anti-Defamation League report, just behind Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Texas. In the past 3 years, someone set fire to a black church in Springfield. A firebomb was thrown outside a Jewish assisted living facility. Fires were set at 4 different Jewish institutions in Arlington, Needham, and Chelsea. And it was just shy of a year ago that a white man who had published a racist screed online went on a shooting rampage in Winthrop, killing 2 black people before he was shot and killed by police. I'm joined by the prosecutor who's been involved in all those cases and has been subjected to multiple racist threats in her role as former Suffolk DA and now U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts. Rachael Rollins, thanks for joining me.
Good to see you, Jim.
Before I get your reaction to all of this as a prosecutor, I want to talk to you as a person. What was your personal reaction to the slaughter that we witnessed in Buffalo?
I was devastated. I looked at that community, people doing what we all do, going shopping for their families. We hear the stories of various people and why they were there, going to help, somebody they love or pick something up to make dinner. And the calculated behavior of someone so young and filled with so much hate, it was devastating.
There's one thing that has stuck with me. There are many things that have stuck with me. I was reading a story in the New York Post, the title of which was "Black Community Members Question Why Accused Mass Shooter Wasn't Shot by the Cops." Look at this photo that you've probably seen, and maybe this is not fair, and I'm not in law enforcement. It looked like these cops could be taking a guy who had been stopped for shoplifting into the backseat of a police car. Is that an unfair reaction from afar by me?
I don't believe it is. And we can go back to January 6th, where we saw people who had committed multiple felonies being gently escorted down a flight of stairs by law enforcement. There is a very different reaction that law enforcement has, I believe, in certain circumstances, to individuals that they can see themselves in. And Dylan Roof and this other person who committed this horrific act of violence in Buffalo was treated after killing 10 people and injuring 3 others better than several other people who might not have been charged with the crime at all, and were manhandled. So there are very different reactions or experiences that certain communities have with law enforcement. And if we aren't willing to hear that, then we're going to continue seeing the same problems over and over again. We know, Jim, with Dylan Roof, he was brought Burger King after he was arrested. Like, when in the history of ever has that happened, that we know of, when, a person of color has gone off to commit multiple violent acts or murders? It's really just, it's incredibly hypocritical. And I'm hearing from across different communities, just people are fed up.
Also, I don't think George Floyd murdered anybody, as best I can.
Of course he didn't.
Recall.
There are individuals whom, have committed no crimes at all or committed misdemeanors, and they're killed during encounters with law enforcement. And we look at Dylan Roof and this person who killed 9 and 10 people, each, who were gently escorted in without a scratch on them. And by the way, Jim, no one is saying we wanted them dead. That's not what's being said, at least certainly by me. We want the same de-escalation and restraint that is shown to those individuals, shown to our community as well.
What were your reflections through a prosecutor's lens on what happened leading up to this mass murder and at it?
I think about, certainly there are obviously mental health issues involved in this case, but I need there to be consistency. There are mental health issues in every single case virtually when I was DA, where we charged somebody with a murder there as well. But there is this sort of reflexive response where there must be mental health issues if it's a, quite frankly, white teenager that engages in the behavior, and the kind of infantilization of white youth. There was something that I read recently where the AP, when they spoke about Michael Brown, who, by the way, killed nobody, but was killed during an interaction with law enforcement. Michael Brown was 18. He was a Black man. When they described this individual, same publication, he was a white teenager. And language and words matter. So, through this lens, I look at how methodical this person was, how many times they went back to make sure that it was going to go exactly as planned, how they were taunting, quite frankly, in high school, saying, what are your plans upon graduation? A murder, suicide? And that, clearly there was an error committed there when he was questioned and, held for a day and a half regarding mental health issues. Did they look to see if there were any firearms in the home? Did they look to see if anyone had a license to carry in that home? Are we going to use this as an opportunity to see where there are holes in the system and we can make things stronger and better?
I'm assuming you haven't done a survey, but I'm guessing you're experiencing what I think exists, is that most of us in this part of the country, let's stay in eastern Massachusetts, shake our heads, but know that can't happen here, and it doesn't happen here. It happens in faraway places like Buffalo. Was it February that you indicted the guy from Maine for burning down the Black church in Springfield, which I think was the second burning of a Black church in Springfield in 12 years? Am I not right about that?
You were absolutely right about that. Immediately after many people were celebrating the election of Barack Obama, Springfield, Massachusetts had a historically Black church was burned. And the U.S. attorney at that time brought charges against those three individuals. And I inherited this case, and we recently indicted the individual that burned another church in Springfield. We have seen, Jim, not only church burnings, which are historically horrific crimes where places of worship are burned to terrorize people. We've also seen the murders in Winthrop. And that happened in a sleepy seaside town where Ramona Cooper and David Green were gunned down. And I very confidently believe that Nathan Allen was on his way to the Jewish community right around the corner. His cell phone had a website up that had incredibly anti-Semitic rhetoric and ideology on that website. So we are fortunate that it is a tragedy that two people died. We are fortunate that only two people died. And the sergeant from the Winthrop Police Department, after pleading with Mr. Allen to drop his weapon, discharged his weapon when he wouldn't, and quite frankly saved many, many other lives.
Is there any part of you, when I put up that chart before where the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, said in terms of hate propaganda, we ranked number 4, which is, I asked my coworkers to double check to make sure there was not a mistake there. Does that, what's that about? I mean, does that surprise you? I guess it doesn't, considering what you do, but
it is a little surprising. I will say when we look at data, we need to be honest about, is this self-reported? If it is self-reported, I'm proud of Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Texas for actually reporting hate crimes. If you tell me when we look at that chart that, Mississippi has 11 hate crimes a year, and they are voluntarily reporting, I'm going to say, look, I don't know whether I don't know whether these numbers properly reflect, but it's disappointing, and we can look at hate crimes, Jim, and hate incidents, right? Or hate speech, where we see an increase in young people, often on sports teams, engaging in using language that is anti-Semitic, homophobic, as well as racist. And that is fertile ground, I believe, for white supremacists to take advantage of.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And so many people have spoken out about these teenage athletes and hate speech. The last couple of nights, we've focused not on teenagers, but grown-ups in positions of power in Everett, Massachusetts. and they apparently haven't committed any crimes, but a city councilor, the cousin of the mayor, sent out emails with the N-word in it on numerous times. The chief spokesperson for the mayor jokingly suggested he bring some dark friends to an event to prove that he wasn't racist. The mayor, again, his cousin, says he deserves a second chance. We did some research today. We can't find one public official beyond the borders of Everett who has had one critical word to say about the exact kind of hate speech in government that you were describing a minute ago. What's that about?
I don't know. I mean, I will tell you that part of why I took this new position and did not remain the Suffolk County DA for quite some time, I hope, is because I think it's incumbent upon the federal government, if we have the ability to look into what city governance or municipal governance is doing, if they're failing certain groups of people or have threads of sexism, racism, anti-Semitism woven through their behavior, and we can show a pattern or practice of that, or ongoing behavior that hasn't been curbed or changed. I think the federal government or the Attorney General's office has an obligation to look into that.
Should those people have jobs? Should those, go back to your human being citizenship, should those people have jobs in government in Everett, Massachusetts?
But
the facts are not disputed. The facts are not disputed.
The facts are not disputed. And I think the people of Everett, this is going to be a telltale moment for Everett. And what do you want to be? What do you want to be remembered as? Are there going to be people, and unfortunately, Jim, sometimes out of horrific, awful situations, positive things grow. And whether that means other people who might not have ever run for office before choose to step up and lead or require change, that's my sincere hope.
You know, before you go, Rachael Rollins, if I could just briefly bring up two other things that you seem to have some involvement in. The Herald reported that you've opened an investigation into Quincy's opposition to the building of the Long Island Bridge, a possible civil rights violation. I assume people know that's a place where addiction recovery went on. It was shut down. Mayor Walsh, former Mayor Walsh, trying to reopen the bridge. Can you tell us anything about that investigation?
Yeah, we sent a letter to the mayor, and I paid the mayor the courtesy of a call prior to sending that letter. It's an inquiry, and I will be, if we find nothing, I will be just as vocal regarding our findings when that occurs. And, for us, Jim, it's been reported for years that there have been potential concerns. And what we want to make sure is that no violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act occurred. We are hyper-focused, Jim, on the opioid crisis, quite frankly. And people understand that our narcotics and money laundering unit handles the trafficking cases, or healthcare fraud goes after the manufacturers of opioids, or pharmacists who divert drugs, or nurses who tamper, or doctors who overprescribe or have pill mills. They understand that our civil rights unit goes after the trial court or the House of Corrections or the Bureau of Prisons or the parole board for medically assisted treatment, but they might not understand that this is also about the opioid crisis. If people aren't getting access to treatment and services, if people are hypothetically or potentially using words like traffic and congestion in exchange for addiction or those people, we want to know whether that's true or not, and we're going to be thorough in our investigation.
Briefly before you go, before you became U.S. Attorney, a judge in Newton, Shelley Joseph, was indicted for allegedly helping an undocumented defendant evade ICE authorities in her courtroom. It was announced, I think, by your office the other day that you've been recused in the case. Your office will continue to prosecute it, but under the direction, I think, of the Rhode Island U.S. Attorney. Why are you recused? Was that on your, did you make that move, or were you told that you had to recuse yourself?
What happened was, when I officially became the U.S. Attorney, there were a list of cases that there were concerns either of a conflict or an appearance of a potential conflict. And ultimately, after discussions with the Executive Office of U.S. Attorneys, I said, rather than have this become a distraction about me, I have no problem with my former colleague here and the current in Rhode Island, Zach Cunha, overseeing this case. This isn't about me, Jim. This is about sure that this individual that's been charged or these individuals get a fair trial, and that the public believes that it was fair and impartial and no one had their finger on the scale.
And this is very quickly because of the litigation that was initiated by you and Middlesex DA Ryan, I assume, when you were the DA of Suffolk. Is that what that's about?
Correct, Jim. When I was the DA of Suffolk, we commenced litigation, a preliminary injunction against ICE, and were successful. And then ultimately, the First Circuit overturned that. But rather than have an appearance of impropriety or anything focus on me, I said, you are in very good hands. And remember, the AUSAs in this office are still handling that case.
Understood.
But they are reporting to my colleague in Rhode Island. And that's something that I support with respect to what EOUSA proposed.
Rachael Rollins, it's good to see you. Thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.